Hello and welcome back to 209 Prep Sports Media, in studio with Scott Bryant. So we're kind of in a holding pattern, as everybody knows. Nothing really changed from last week, and I feel like being in Northern California, sometimes we're left in the dark a little bit relative to our brothers and sisters in the South section and the LA area, where I feel like they're a little bit more informed. And so today, we're going to go ahead and kind of go through some sound bites of a meeting that happened yesterday. Actually, it was just a webinar, a YouTube, like a webinar type thing with the South Section Commissioner. What was his name? Rob Wygod. Yeah.
Wygod?
So Rob. So prior to this, it was advertised that it was going to happen, and there were throughout social media, and I caught wind of it, and and I saw a bunch of people had submitted some questions. So basically, it was a Q&A session for him, and he was very forthcoming. I don't think he hid from a lot. I don't think he sidestepped a lot. Some people might disagree with me, but I feel like there's so much that, we don't know, and there's so much that's going on that are outside the control of, most of us and the districts, and, the state's kind of in control right now, and not even leaving it up to the counties. So we're pretty much in a statewide stay in place order. So I think yesterday's Q&A was very informative, and so Scott and I'll kind of go through some of these and bounce ideas back and forth, give our thoughts on the things that were discussed yesterday, and then we'll get into some other topics. So
yeah, before we play our first soundbite, I got the opportunity to watch this press conference, and there were some things on there that I agree with, but there were some points that were made that I don't completely agree with, and I don't think it's a secret that I'm not a huge fan of the CIF for multiple reasons. One being, I sure hope that they're not still billing the schools for the services that are not being provided, because I know the schools pay quite a bit per section. They pay to their section office. I think they pay to the state, and there's probably a small fee to their local leagues. So I hope that there's been some concession made on that, because the schools, like everybody else, are going to be hurting, and the CIF really, other than being an adjunct for information that's disseminated from the state, they really aren't, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, they're not really performing a function. But I digress, because I think I've vented on here before. I do want to make note of one thing that Rob said right off the get-go that I will say that I don't agree with. He basically came out at the beginning of this press conference, and on speaking on behalf of the CIF, he said, "We're ready to go, but the schools are not." Well, I disagree with that. I think at least the schools that I've seen in our local area, I think our schools are ready to go. I think, for example, I know that your program has been working every chance they can get. That's allowed. I mean, you've had to adhere to some pretty strict rules, and you guys have done a really good job of that. And I think the numbers reflect that, because there hasn't been any transmission within your group with the functions that you've had. And I would say that's probably the case for most of the high schools. The coaches and the players and the staffs at these schools, I think they really know what they're missing out on by not providing these opportunities to our student athletes. And we've said this many times. I think our biggest concern right now isn't so much the fact that they don't get to play, but I think it's more of the mental health of our teenage athletes, because they're it's a tough time as it is, getting through high school, deciding what you're going to do next. We take away that outlet, and it gets really tough for them. But we'll start off here. The first thing I want to play is a question that's in regards to some, if they're going to have clear and definitive timelines.
Great question. About 2 months ago, at the beginning of October, the CIF prepared a plan with our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, which is made up of doctors and health professionals. And that plan was a return to play plan based on the colored tiers that we've been following, the purple, the red, the orange, and the yellow. And we submitted that plan to the California Department of Public Health and have worked with them and been in lots of conversations to talk about those plans and what would be a healthy and safe way to get back to high school sports. We've been waiting to get the response, the official response from those guidelines, and we hope to get it soon. But clearly in the last couple of weeks, our county health directors and our state Department of Public Health have been focused on many bigger issues than just what's happening with high school athletics. So I know it's frustrating, but we are waiting for those guidelines to come, and I think that will help everybody get a roadmap for the future and how we can get high school sports back.
So, I don't think there was too much information that we can gather from that, other than the fact that they've kind of, they have a plan that's reactionary to what the state describes they're going to do based on the tiers. I don't know that there was really much of an answer there, other than the fact of the only thing I got out of that is, yeah, we're ready, but we're not going to tell you what the plan is.
Yeah, and, he alluded to the fact that they don't know what the plan is because it's pretty much been left. The state had a plan devised, and when we came up with the latest COVID-ish numbers and started discussing the statewide stay in place, that Monday they were actually supposed to release the state was supposed to release their guidelines to the CIF, who could then coordinate this with the individual leagues and sections. But like you said, it seems like they punted, and here's my problem is that, and I think we talked about this last week, is that when this all started in March and then things began to escalate, everybody initially, I thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And now we're turned into, 10 months and with no real end in sight. Now that's not necessarily 100% true with vaccines coming out next week, to the essential frontline workers and potentially teachers and things like that. But the problem is that when this happened, and then as things began to escalate, you could read reports and go back, and anything dated in, April or May, everybody said when flu season hits, the numbers were going to be exacerbated. You're going to have flu numbers on top of COVID numbers, and the copulation would be some ridiculous, lack of ICU beds and all the things that are currently happening. So basically, California, in all of their infinite wisdom, chose to start a season knowing this was going to be the worst time to start a season. So his answer, even though today, as we sit, there's nothing we can really do about it, and there are more pressing issues. We've had 9 months to build to this, and we were in pretty good situation for much of those 9 months relative to where we're at today. And that question that you just asked, even though it was in the southern section, was my question. I posed that on Instagram to them and asked, why are there not plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D with timelines, with, hey, plan A was 12/7. Plan B might be 1/7. Plan C is 1/19, and so on and so forth. But it's not identified. And so it's hard for the layperson, it's hard for the students, it's hard for the coaches, for any of us to make a plan or to keep a positive attitude towards something when it's not being divulged.
Well, and it's not like they haven't had time to come up with this. They, look at our teachers, for example. Our teachers have been thrown a curveball, and they're having to navigate distance learning, and they're doing, from what I can understand and the little that I know of it, they've done a pretty good job of that. It's difficult. I think there's a lot of things that go along with that make learning definitely a little bit more difficult. But I think the CIF, they're our governing body when it comes to high school sports, but they should also be our biggest advocate. So to me, it's like you see, like recently there was a march in Sacramento on a Sunday by a group of high school athletes basically begging for the opportunity to play sports. Where was the CIF and all that? Why weren't they advocating for that? It's a peaceful protest. They're not looting. They're not tearing down storefronts. They're not doing all this stuff. They're peacefully protesting, which, I think it's a great thing. They're passionate about what they want to do. They went out and protested But the CIF is sitting around on their hands, and they had no involvement. There was no promotion there. To me, it's like they should be advocating for us, and they're not.
And I don't know that this is 100% factual, but whoever put that protest together used the CIF logo. And I remember reading something, and I think it was the CIF that replied to it, saying that they distanced themselves from that. That wasn't there. That even wasn't there. You know, obviously they didn't organize it, but they didn't even actually necessarily agree with it.
So we'll move on. The next question was in regards to some mental health issues, and here it is.
Chief of Staff.
Next question, now, and this is from a parent. Has the mental and emotional toll of our athletes and the implications on their future and livelihood been expressed to the governor and or those who have continued to block high school sports?
Absolutely. This has been an effort that, as I mentioned, we have been involved in for months and months now. And I will tell you that we've worked very hard to get as much information as we can to our health professionals, to those who oversee all of this that we are waiting for, to let them know how important it is for us to get our high school student athletes back. We know the benefits of high school athletics. We know what education-based athletics does for students. We totally believe in their mental and physical and social and emotional well-being, and we know that education-based athletics help make that happen. So I can assure you that we have tried very, very hard to make sure that we get that message out, and that we know that getting our student athletes back will be in their best interest. But again, only when it's healthy and safe to do so.
Okay, so I agree with what he's saying there. I think if that actually is what they're doing, good for them. I personally, you know, from what I've read and what I've heard and what I've seen, I don't know that they're making a great effort to do that. I think more at the local level. I've heard more from high school coaches when it comes to this. I've heard more from administrators and teachers about our student athletes' mental health. This is really the first time I've heard someone from the CIF address it. And you know, good for them for addressing it, because I do think that really is one of the biggest aspects that we need to kind of comprehend through all of this.
Yeah, and it's, you know, the mental health piece is definitely concerning. And then, you know, and most people glance over the fact of the physical health part of it. You know, the kids sitting around for months on end, you know, in front of a computer and afraid to leave the house because of, you know, again, their fear of catching the virus or spreading the virus to a family member or what have you. You know, there's a definitive clinical association between physical health, you being healthy, and your mental health associated with it. And I think that in times like this, they're glanced over because there's this immediate this sense of an immediate fear that makes it feel like it's okay to put the rest of your concerns on the back burner. The problem with that is that, you know, there's what is it? The habit. So a habit is created after 8 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. So habitually, if a habit is created over, just say it's 8 weeks, and I think it's less than that, but just say it's 8 weeks. Well, now we're 10 months into this, and you've created a habit of waking up in the morning, being on your computer for 7 or 8 hours, sitting around watching TV, playing video games or whatever, and then getting back on your phone and going through social media. You know, so basically you've created this habit of doing nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and so getting kids back to a place where, you know, and we saw it initially when we got back in the weight room and were able to condition, how out of shape kids got in such a short period of time. And those that missed it stayed, and those that felt the pain, you know, threw up the first day or whatever it may be, it wasn't a badge of honor anymore. It was like, I don't want to do this, and I'll just go home and stay at home like with everybody else.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that too is, you know, you form a habit, like you said, after 8 weeks. Well, you know, the argument could also be made the opposite way of how they're being deprived of the ability to get better at what they really love to do. When you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he talks about the 10,000 hours. He's the one that really brought that up to the forefront. And I know a lot of people talk about it socially, but he makes a great point that, you know, on anything that you want to be good at, it takes 10,000 hours of you committed to it to not necessarily perfect it, but to get to a mastery level. And every hour that we are taking away from these student athletes that really want to go to the next level, that want to play in college, hour by hour, we're pulling that opportunity away from them. So let's say in high school athletics, you're just in practice time alone, you're not going to hit that 10,000 hours, but it's going to contribute. You're going to have guidance for, 2 or 3 hours after school, where you've got a coach that's going to guide you through, let's say it's basketball practice, and he's going to teach you how to, the best way to hit a jump shot when there's somebody barreling down in front of you, or how to make a 15-yard out route if you're a wide receiver in football practice, and really perfect that. And then you take what you learned in that 2 or 3 hour practice, and you go beyond that, and you work on those skills. Well, we're taking those times away from our student athletes, and so they're trying to have to figure it out on their own. And kudos to the kids that are doing this. And I see kids that are sneaking onto high school campuses and sneaking into baseball cages or soccer fields or whatever. I've seen girls volleyball teams get together outside at people's houses and put up a volleyball court where they can still run a practice. But it's heartbreaking to think that not only are they forming these bad habits, but it's almost as if, and I'm not saying this is anybody's fault, but it's almost as if COVID is stealing that from our kids.
I think that's a perfect analogy.
So moving on, he takes a question on a topic that we've discussed many times on this show, and that's athletics in other states.
Now, these are some questions regarding other sports or other states who are currently playing, and this is from Caden from Buena. Other states have proven to us that it is safe to play football, and it does not help with the spike of COVID-19. Why are we so behind, and could we have played earlier?
Well, Caden, we've been in touch with a lot of our friends in the other states, specifically the states in the West, many of whom did have the opportunity to play some fall sports at the normal time frame that fall sports take place. They had their hiccups, they had their problems, but they also were able to conduct their high school athletic programs in a healthy and safe way. So I know it's frustrating for us here in California. We want the chance. That's really all we've said, is give us a chance. And we believe that we could follow the rules appropriately and we can do it right. But unfortunately, with what's been happening in our state, and certainly what's been happening over the last month or so, it's been difficult to see us make any progress. So I understand how frustrated you are. I know a lot of people are, to know that other states have played and they feel that we should also. And the difference would be that in those other states, those in authority believed it was okay to go ahead and proceed, and they did. But again, here in California, we're waiting for our chance, and I believe if we get that chance, we'll do it right. And that's our plan, to try to get that chance.
I'm going to comment on this real quick. I think that was a long answer that he made that could have been answered very quickly. Basically, his response is, the state's telling us that we can't do it, so we're not going to do it. And I understand that. But this goes back to my point earlier. He keeps talking about waiting. We're waiting. Okay, these other states, they didn't wait. They went out, they did their work, they advocated for their athletes, and they got the powers that be to agree that, yes, if you do things with these guidelines, we're going to let you start. I don't think the CIF has even come close to doing that. I don't think that they've gone to the state and said, look, we now have, kind of an example. Let's say in the state of, I've got a friend in the state of South Dakota, and they've played a full football season without any issues. And they adhere to certain guidelines, and everybody involved knew of the guidelines, and they did them, and they were very successful. Like you said, were there hiccups? Of course there were, but there's going to be hiccups with anything. It's just disappointing that we didn't even try. Well,
we're seeing the hiccups across all facets of life. It's not just hiccups for football. It's small business. I mean, we're having, and adjustments having to be made on a regular basis. I've seen arguments, and I think we've got some arguments or some pushback on things that I've been involved with that say, oh, you know, these other states are canceling sports or they're postponing. Okay. I mean, I can promise you today that if you poll our athletes and our high school athletes and ask them, if you were afforded the opportunity to play and you contracted COVID during your season and you had to sit out whatever the period is, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever it may be, would you want to start the season? And I guarantee you to a person, they would say 100% yes. Wow. The problem with, I think, the way we approach this in California is that we waited on the state to make the determination for us. I think the other states devised a plan, presented it to the state, and put the onus back on the state to then make the decision instead of waiting for the why is this a priority for the state? What is this? What is the state? What are any of the politicians or any of the anybody? There's nobody lobbying on the behalf of the children. So what is if you have, you know, people are worried about small business, people are worried about hospitals, people are worried about their own, you know, individual lives. Why is high school sports a priority? So the CIF in that regard should have made it a priority, and they should have devised a plan that they went to the state and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be our start date. If something were to happen, you know, if it's a one-off, if it's 2 people that contracted it and we have this contact tracing, then those 5 kids sit out. Mm-hmm. If it's more than 5, then the entire team has to sit out until they get through that period or whatever it may be. But to not have anything in place, and here's the problem, because there hasn't been transparency, and because nobody is coming and talking to any or presenting on a regular basis, we don't know what was done.
Right.
So all you can assume that nothing was done because there's nothing being said that something was done.
Yeah, and I welcome anyone from the CIF that wants to challenge me on the comments that I've made on this show, because I don't think I've said anything that's out of line. I think you could take any of the comments I have and really pose them as questions to the CIF. Answer them. You know, tell us what's going on. Our section is not communicating with us. You know, they're not. What the fact that here we are in the 209 talking about 209 sports, and the information that we're having to disseminate is from the southern section. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. We should be going through a press conference from Mike Garrison of the CIF Sac Joaquin section, but he's hiding under a rock or something because he's not doing anything. Those are my words, not anybody else's.
And this Q&A presentation yesterday that they did, you know, this is, I mean, first class. I mean, they have a podium and everything. But to be honest with anybody who's out there, I put this studio together for a minimal amount of money. And one time when Scott happened to be out of town, we recorded on my phone. So this can be done. And if you want to say it's a money thing, we don't have the money to do something like this, to do a weekly presentation, bullshit. I mean, you can do this for such a nominal amount of money, and at the same time create that transparency that will, now you have people in your corner instead of, you know, there's a lot of doubt.
There's a lot of schools in our section, in our CIF Sac Joaquin section, that have studios, that have communication departments where they're teaching kids broadcast journalism. I know that firsthand that's happening. So just run a podcast, run a press conference, do whatever. Tell our student athletes, tell our parents, tell our administrators what's going on. Don't make people have to dig through and go to another section to get their information. But we'll move on. Here's our next topic.
I have a straight answer on whether we return to sports, as I know a lot of people will move states if we don't. And if other states have successfully implemented a season, why can't we?
Well, Sebastian, again, we're trying to do everything that we can to advocate for the return to play for high school student athletes. And the way to do that is to continue to work with those in power and those in authority at the state and local level. And so we've been on an ongoing effort every single day to provide information, to provide everything that we can to hopefully get approvals so that our schools can go forward. Again, our schools are advocating for this. We are advocating for this at the CIF level. We are all trying. Our parents, our student athletes, our coaches, our athletic directors, our principals, we all believe in the same thing. We're all on the same side. We're all on the same page. We all want to have our student athletes back on campus and doing what they love to do, and we love to watch them do. But we have to go through procedures and protocols to make sure that it is done in a safe and healthy way. And I would say this, it's always been our priority and always will be our priority that health and safety of student athletes is number one. It always will be. And so that is part of our issue here with the pandemic, but it's that way whether there was a pandemic or not. And so we are working as hard as we can through the channels that we need to work through to try to make this happen. And again, we're thinking of the student athletes first, and that's who we're trying to make this happen for.
Okay, I agree with a lot of what he's saying. The one thing that I agree with the most is the safety of the student athlete. I will say CIF, I think, generally does a really good job of that. And adhering to guidelines, that's not in question either. But when he says that we constantly advocate for the student athlete, that's where I kind of don't necessarily agree with them. It's easy to advocate for the student athlete when times are easy. But now we're in a pandemic. It's a terrible time for everyone involved. It's a terrible disease. But if it can be navigated in a safe manner, like it has been proven in other states, and we're beating a horse here, then why are we not truly advocating? I don't think they are. I think they can get up in front of a microphone and say they are, and normally they would be because it's easy to do. But it's difficult times right now, and I just don't think they're fighting hard enough. But that's my opinion.
Well, and I think there's a great analogy here with, think about a commercial airline pilot. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they don't fly the plane anymore. But when times get tough, and if the equipment goes out, or the weather gets bad, or there's something that happens, and then that's where the experience of a captain and somebody who's going to be a leader, comes in, and you have like Sully, landing in the Hudson River. If you relied on status quo and the equipment, those hundreds of people would not be here today.
Right.
And so, like you said, I think it's easy to say that, yeah, we do this, and I do think that they do. I do think that I think that their heart's in the right place. I just think that there's been a lot of acceptance of the situation, and the reality of it is kids have already left. I mean, kids have already left the state and will continue to leave the state. I mean, we're seeing, and it's not just. I mean, there's a direct correlation with things that are going on in California, tied to the political environment. I mean, you have business leaving, you have student athletes leaving. I mean, and it's all tied to this political group that's running the state today. So I won't get into that.
All right, we'll move on
and play your sports. So it does not require all 7 of our counties to be in the same place to get things going.
This is from Ryan from Milliken. What is the latest date you will push the football season back? When will you cancel it and stop pushing it back if it comes to that point?
Well, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say that our football programs were allowed to begin practice on February 15th. Our football programs are required to have 14 days of practice prior to their first game. So let's say if we started February 15th, the first contest would be March 5th. In our calendar right now, that's the 9th week of the regular season. So let's say that the students were able to play on March 5th and March 12th, and that was weeks 9 and 10. Well, we would immediately, there were 4 weeks scheduled for Southern Section Championships. And at that point, we probably wouldn't be able to do that. Those 4 weeks now become part of the regular season. Those league games that you weren't able to play before week 9 and 10 could now be played in week 11, 12, 13. We could get full league play done, and maybe even potentially have some postseason, maybe a bowl game kind of environment where without the ability to run Southern Section Championships, we would still have maybe an additional week or 2 weeks to play a bowl game kind of thing, give some kind of a postseason experience to our football student athletes. So if you were looking for a time or an absolute drop dead date, I guess I just provided a scenario for you that could be as late as February or even in the middle of February. And by that time, we may run out of time and not be able to do it. But I'd like to think that even if we started football practice around February 15, there's still a way to get a 6 or even 7 game season in. And while that's not a 10 game season, and with full section championships, 6 or 7 games is certainly better than 0 games or better than 2 games. So that's the thought behind that.
I think this is probably one of the best things he described in his press conference. Clearly, this commissioner has collaborated with his with his staff, and it sounds like to me that they actually do have a plan in place, and even maybe a contingency plan for that. Again, where's the Sac Joaquin section on this? Why are they not telling us information like this so that people can mentally prepare? People can, okay, February 15th now is our date, possibly. So that's what we're going to gear towards. That's what we're going to prep for. It's like people have to realize that, he talks about the 14-day requirement for the first practice. Okay, that applies to football because football is a contact sport. That's not applicable to every sport. That's applicable to football. But student athletes, or any athlete for that matter, you can be playing in the 55 and above beer hockey league. You still want to know when your game is. You still want to know if there's practice because you have to prepare for it. It's like give the student athletes some type of indication of when we might play so that they can be out training on their own, getting in shape. So the football coach can have a Zoom conference with them and say, look, guys, we can't get together for practice, but here's the date that potentially we're going to go on. I'd really like for you to show up in shape, so that they're better prepared for that. So to me, I would like to see, and who knows, maybe the CIF already does have plans in place, but they're just not, I don't think they're doing a very good job of communicating that. And
I think this was the most, that question and that answer was the most, I guess, not exciting, I guess is the word, but if you're going to look forward to anything, that's probably the date. I mean, if you work, and I think earlier in the broadcast, he talked about how they do the scheduling and they work backwards. So they basically set the last possible date and then they work their schedules backwards from there. And that's kind of what they did with this new season 1, season 2 thing, is they set their final date of whatever it was going to be, April 14th or whatever it was, and then work their way backwards. So basically, if we don't start by February 15th, February 22nd, something like that, there won't be a football season. I mean, there just won't. And it's, and I get that and I understand that, and the one thing, if read between the lines a little bit. So, he said, play your league schedule and there may be a possible, bowl game. Well, what is a bowl game? I mean, if you think about it, how college works, there's 30 something bowl games. So there's not, 2 teams make the playoffs. It's, I could see a situation where everybody kind of plays some type of a postseason game. And maybe the top handful of teams in each division, might duke it out for a section title or something like that. But I think that foreshadowing a little bit. If we were to have a season, that's probably how they try to recoup recoup money and keep, keep the ability to keep the CIF up and running. Because at this point, I read today on Twitter that they're going to be, the southern section will begin to furlough some CIF employees. Mm-hmm. And it went on to say statewide it's going to happen as well.
Sure. And we've talked about that before. I think the CIF has always kind of had a target on their backs when it comes to the paradigm shift of high school age athletes playing the most of their given sports at the club level, and we're gonna see more kids pushed over to that because I'm not gonna say who, when, or where, or why, but I see all the time club teams. I saw a club team this weekend having baseball practice. They were wearing masks. They were social distancing. They were doing what they were, what appears to be responsible, and good for them, and what's going to happen is that you're just going to, again, it's the little league mentality. Our little leagues are shrinking up by the day because of travel ball and club ball. And we're going to see that as well. It'll be interesting to me though, that if that does start happening, it'll be interesting to see how the sport of football reacts to that. We don't know necessarily what that's going to be, but we'll see. I I don't know. I think the CIF, they could possibly have their days numbered to a certain degree. The final soundbite we're going to play here.
No High School Affiliation says, why can't we just get the option to play another season / school year and make this one not count due to COVID?
And that question's come up a lot, Josh, and we've had a lot of discussions on the statewide level about that. It is a statewide rule about 4 years, 8 semesters of eligibility. And the consensus around the state is that student athletes do have the opportunity to earn grades. They earn credits towards graduation. They do have academics going on as we speak. And the ability of our schools to absorb another year of students who decided to remain for another year of high school academically, first of all, is problematic. What courses would they take? We're certainly not encouraging student athletes to stop going to school right now so that they can come back for another year. And how would our schools be able to take on another year's worth of students when the freshmen in the fall of 2021 come forward? That would be incredibly expensive and costly for our schools, who have already had to spend a tremendous amount of money putting in health and safety protocols and different things they've had to do with staffing and so forth. So there's a lot involved with adding another year to the current student athletes. And I know it's been compared to the NCAA because that's what they have done. But remember now, the NCAA decides who gets into their colleges and universities. They limit their numbers and they admit the number of students that they admit every year. That's not the same situation in high schools. Our students come to our high schools every single year and they come. And there isn't necessarily a limit or a restriction on how many. So just for those reasons alone, we want student athletes to progress toward graduation. We want them to keep their academics up, even in the virtual and online formats that they're dealing with. While they're missing out on athletics, no question, their academics have to come first. And so the ability of student athletes to come back for another year, bring on an entire new group of freshmen in the fall of 2021 is more of a burden than our schools can handle, not only financially, but even space-wise and all the other factors associated with it. So I get that question a lot, and I'm not saying it's not a good question. It's just the actual reality of what it would mean to our high schools is something that doesn't seem to be very feasible going forward.
Great question here.
Okay, so I think he blurs the lines a little bit here, trying to compare high school sports to the NCAA. I know what his intentions were, but I don't think that, stating that the NCAA has full control over how many athletes get to go to the school. I think you have to factor in red shirt stuff. I think, or getting an additional year for this or that. The NCAA has come out and granted an additional year of eligibility to the fall and winter sport athletes, I imagine, and then last year's spring sports athletes. So even while they did this, there are schools that are opting to not honor that. It's up to the school. So you have to remember there are 3 people that have to be in agreement for that to happen. Number 1, the NCAA. They've already done that. Number 2, the athlete has to agree to come back. And number 3, the school has to agree to take them back. Depending on the athlete, if they've got a chance to turn pro in their sport or whatever, they may move on. But the problem is the agreement between the school and the athlete and having them come back. But I agree with him on the fact that at the high school level, it is problematic because the rules that are in place about, for example, you can't compete athletically if you're, and maybe clarify this for me, but if you turn the age of 19 or the age of 19 before your senior year, is that correct?
Something like that. Within your senior year, something like that.
So there's rules like that are in place, and a lot of it is because, now you're having adults play with students. And so I get that. But, all in all, I appreciate the fact that he came forward and had this press conference and was able to take questions and answer questions that people have. If you get a chance, go on the CIF Southern Section website and you can see that in its entirety. The one last thing, and this is me always having a little dig on the CIF, the one last thing that kind of bothered me as I listened to this, I watched it last night, the whole time he's on there saying, our student athletes, we must do whatever we can for them. and just on and on and on about how the CIF is there for our student athletes. But then when it came down to the school returning to school question, you didn't hear it in that soundbite. It's a little bit later. But then he basically says, well, no, they're each individual school's athletes. Well, what are they? The CIF athletes, or are they the schools? To me, it was a Freudian slip, and they need to do a better job of making sure that they're making good decisions for our kids. And I think for the most part they are, but there's some things that I still think need to be changed.
Yeah, and this is going to probably go a little longer than we've normal, but I do have a little bit of an issue with that last topic. You know, they you know, and to compare it to college athletics, I mean, reality is the college athletes keep their eligibility, but they may lose scholarship, you know, and some of them are going to choose to not come back for their last year because they've have the ability to graduate and start to earn. So, but some, you know, have that passion for the sport and they don't want to miss all of their opportunities. So, and then I think at the high school level, you know, if we are fortunate enough to get some type of games in at the football level, what most people don't understand is that these kids' opportunities will present themselves within their junior year. You know, people start looking at them as freshmen and sophomores, but by the time you're a junior, you really need film, you know, and for football players to not have film at this point, it really restricts your opportunities. And so, you know, we're also, we talk about COVID and pandemic, and it's a different time, you know, we're going to have to think differently. We're going to have to think outside the box, and it may be and within everybody's benefit, or everybody's, you know, the benefit of the children to give them that opportunity if a family chose to do that. I'm not saying that I believe they should or they shouldn't, but with so much that's been taken away, here's the one thing that I will say is that our students in California are at a definitive disadvantage relative to the other states that chose to go back to school in person, that chose to have athletics, that chose to kind of live with COVID and not hide from COVID. I don't know if that's the right word, but our state has chose to restrict itself, and other states have chose not to. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer as to how it's been done. You don't see the states that chose to participate and bring their kids back to school full time. You don't see the numbers being exorbitantly higher than the states that chose to restrict sports and in school learning. My problem with where things that land outside of sports is if you're comparing a junior or a senior student that's applying to any school, just let's say, for instance, you know, it doesn't matter what it may be, just UC Davis or Sac State or wherever it may be, and they're competing with a kid that's out of state that's had a whole year of in-person learning relative to distance learning, where the grading's different, testing's different. You know, I have my daughter who was on one of these broadcasts earlier, our podcast earlier. She had just completed her first quarter at Oregon, and her grades are very, very good, but she busted her butt. She got 8 hours because she plays softball. She gets 8 hours of free tutoring a week. So
that's pretty awesome.
You know, and you know, so she's going to make Dean's List, and I think that's not a bragging, but you take these other kids now who have not gone to school for what will be nearly a year and a half by the time this is all said and done. Mm-hmm. And you're going to send a senior into that environment. And now some of these students will be fine because they're just great students, good study habits. They understand it. But you take these other kids that were marginal students or even slightly above marginal that haven't tested in that environment in a year and a half, you know, that don't have any study habits whatsoever because they're doing their homework at midnight, or they're doing their homework at 1 p.m, or they're doing their homework during their art class.
Yeah.
You know, so that's where I think that we might need to take a step back here and really reevaluate where we're at. I read that LA County, I think there's 400,000 students in LA County, the LA school district or something like that. 50% were failing their classes.
Sure. I believe that.
So where are we at, man? Like we have to take there has to be a broader picture, and it's not going to happen today. It's going to happen over time. But what we're going to see is that if we don't address it, and if we don't put a second set, a third set, a fourth set of eyes on things and really say, hey man, at the end of the day, if we don't know that this is the right way to do it, we might think about a different way to do it.
Yeah.
Because the people that are going to suffer are not you and I. They're not the people that the CIF. They're not the people in the Capitol in Sacramento. It's the children that will be leading this state, leading this country, leading our counties, and teaching the next generations.
Yeah, and I've said this before that, you know, what's happening now, and this can be applied to a lot of things, not just a pandemic. It can be applied to anything. But what we're seeing now, we will see the byproduct of what's occurring now 4 years from now, 5 years from now, 7, 10 years from now. We're going to see the effects of this, and you know, I'm hoping that it's like that old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know, I really hope that our kids today are going to be stronger because of this. That's all we can hope for, I think, at this point.
And I agree. So with that being, go ahead.
I got one more thing I want to share with you. I been watching, you know, being a fan of high school sports in the whole area. There is a show that comes on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock on Sunday nights. It's the 49ers Cal High Prep Show, and it highlights local athletes. It's usually a highlight show for you know, results and stuff like that. But because there hasn't been any results, they've been doing segments on local athletes, and it's really fun to watch. I will say this: I think that they're planning on expanding their coverage areas, but you know, Sunday nights on Comcast Bay Area, I think that, you know, if you're into high school sports, and there's a lot of good athletes on there that they've highlighted over the years that are now playing professionally or have played professionally. It's a fun show to watch, so I highly recommend checking that out if you can.
And before we leave, you know, there's a lot of traction on all the social media sites. We've got a lot of questions and support, and we greatly appreciate it. We kind of did this organically and just, you know, because at the bottom of our hearts we have an affinity for these kids and athletics in general, and so to get the support that we're getting from the community and our followers, it's you guys are second to none, you know. And again, we can't thank Jake Peters enough for the production of these podcasts. Jake does a phenomenal job taking out my heavy breathing and us moving around in the studio, and we have traffic going up and down the road, so he does a great job blocking that out. But again, if you ever want to reach out to us and be a guest or sending questions, you can reach us on Twitter at 209 Prep, on Facebook at 209 Prep Sports. Or you can email us at any time at prepsports209@yahoo.com. Again, prepsports209@yahoo.com. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.